Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about Cosmos, what our risk indicator is making of its recent price action, and why I think Cosmos and its ecosystem are a pretty exciting place to be right now. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So to start off, just to give some context, I want to talk about what our risk indicator, the upside downside potential indicator, is making of Atom's price action more recently. If you're not familiar with this indicator, it's our risk indicator. Higher values of the UDPI suggest high risk, lower values suggest low risk. And you can see that over Atom's history, the UDPI has done a good job of identifying these high risk zones where distributing Atom has been advantageous, and then these low risk zones where acquiring Atom has been advantageous. So you can see that more recently, we'd had another dip down into the green back in December of 21. We then put in that really nice move to retest the all-time highs in early January, overheated, risk remained elevated, and now it's cooling off. We're kind of down in this general zone here. If I switch over to the raw output of the model, we can see this a bit more clearly. So this is just the long-term UDPI. This is reactive to moves that play out over months, so a longer-term time preference. And we can just see the raw output across time here. And what you can see is, we went in, we got to really elevated levels of risk back in the fall of 21, had that big kind of move back down, caught a bounce when retested all-time highs, and now we're kind of coming back over here. And you can see that risk has kind of fallen into this general type of range here, right? Kind of between 1 and roughly -1. And one of the things that is notable about Atom, in my opinion, is the fact that it didn't go deeper into these levels during this kind of correction that it had. And so the upside downside potential indicator was really trying to capture is how much downside versus upside potential is realistic. And the idea being that the lower an asset goes, the more downside potential it's realizing, and then in that case just creating an imbalance where upside is a lot more plausible than continued downside at that point. But another way that you can interpret this is that when an asset is in a correction, if its UDPI level doesn't go all the way into the deep negatives, down at these deep levels, sometimes that suggests a show of strength by the asset. It suggests that there's more realistic downside that was possible, but the asset didn't actually have to do that before it caught a bottom. Essentially, investors stepped in before the asset actually realized as much downside as was plausible, at least from the model's estimation. And you'll see some strong projects do this, or projects that have strong price action. Ethereum, for example, has done this a number of times, where in corrections, it does not go down as far on its UDPI as some other assets. And so sometimes that could be a show of strength. Not always. Obviously, the risk there is that if something changes, there's that downside potential that's still there. So if the floor falls out, price could come crashing down through those levels. But it can also suggest confidence by market participants. So they don't need to wait until that much downside potential is realized before stepping in and then forming a bottom on that asset. So something that's interesting. And we've noted this before with other assets. So when you see this kind of continual rising of the bottoms, so higher lows, that tends to be indicative of bull market behavior. So for example, with Bitcoin, when you see Bitcoin putting in higher lows, that tends to happen when Bitcoin's in a bull market. Now, obviously, with an altcoin like Atom, it is going to be tethered to what Bitcoin's doing, if Bitcoin is healthy or not. And so for Atom to go ahead and realize a bunch of this upside potential, I would imagine Bitcoin will have to remain at least in the same range it's at, if not more bullish. I think it's probably unlikely that Atom can go crazy while Bitcoin is dumping, for example. But this is a structure in the UDPI we like to see. And so we'll have to wait and see what happens over the coming months, especially if the broader market can remain bullish. I see no reason why this upside potential could not be in play in the coming months. Something we'll have to watch and see what happens. So to look at the specific level, it's at -0.64 right now. So in the long term, that just basically means that kind of on that longer term time frame, it thinks that there's more upside potential that's realistic than downside, although not to an extreme amount. This is kind of relatively neutral, suggesting a relatively equal footing here. But essentially what this means is that if the market turns bullish, I would think this upside potential could come into play. But if the market turns especially bearish, we have room to fall. And especially if, unlike in these past moves, if investors aren't willing to step in early, we could start to realize some of this downside potential. But I'm going to talk in a minute about why I think Cosmos might have some things going for it that might be part of the reason why investors have been stepping in more recently. Some more fundamental aspects that I think might be setting it, kind of insulating it from the downside that could have been possible. But I also want to talk about the medium-term UDPI. This is reactive to moves that play out over weeks to months, so a bit shorter in its time horizon. And this is pretty much bang on neutral, so about the same amount of upside and downside potential in the medium term. That seems plausible to the model. And the short term is a similar story as well, where in the coming, this is reactive to moves that play out over days to weeks, so even shorter in its time preference. And again, it's kind of sitting at around neutral. And essentially what I'm kind of envisioning, or the way that I am interpreting this data, is that Atom is just going to be waiting to see what the market does to some degree, probably. If the market turns bullish, I think it can start really moving back up. Turns bearish, could start moving down. Exactly how far down, though, is obviously, or how far up, obviously, we'd have to wait and see. But I want to talk now about some factors with Atom that I think might have been insulating it from some of this downside potential that could have been plausible more recently, and the way that it's kind of starting to realize a lot of its more fundamental potential, and also how it's fitting in nicely with some of the narratives surrounding crypto right now. So first, I just want to show you here on CoinGecko, we're just looking at the top Cosmos ecosystem coins by market cap, and really just what I wanted to highlight here is that Cosmos as a network, and again, for those not familiar with Cosmos, its kind of main purpose is to be this kind of internet of blockchains, essentially connecting a bunch of different blockchains together that can seamlessly interoperate with each other. And we're already seeing this happen, right? So Osmosis, for example, is the kind of leading decentralized exchange in the Cosmos ecosystem. And if you've ever used Osmosis, it's pretty remarkable. You know, you can take any of these chains that are separate chains but are connected within the Cosmos network, and you can just seamlessly just move assets in and out of one chain to the other. It's very kind of simple. You know, Kava also offers the same kind of interoperability where you can move assets from different chains through Kava being another decentralized exchange, lending, borrowing type platform. And what I think is notable here is that the Cosmos ecosystem has been doing quite well in terms of valuation. Just look at the market caps, right? You know, Terra Luna has been doing very well recently. It has had a pretty steep correction in the last week, but you know, Terra has been gaining a lot of attention recently, in no small part due to the stablecoin that's native to Terra, UST, gaining a lot of attention and market share. But then Kronos, also affiliated with, or really the kind of the chain connected to Crypto.com, is another one that's gotten a lot of value locked on it in DeFi. And I'm going to talk about DeFi here in a second. And in fact, these two chains are actually valued higher than Atom itself, the Cosmos chain itself, which is notable because there are a few of these kind of networks that exist where actually things part of the network are worth more than the head of the network itself. So for example, with Polkadot has a bunch of parachains that have now launched on it, but none of the parachains have been able to eclipse Polkadot itself in terms of valuation or in terms of market cap. So in some ways, it's actually kind of notable that the kind of parent, you know, Atom here, has actually been eclipsed by some of the things that are kind of built within its network. I think that's interesting. But I want to talk about DeFi adoption of the Cosmos chains, because I think this is something that's important and probably important to the narrative here. So the first part of the narrative for Cosmos is interoperability, right? That's what it's built on. And I think interoperability is one of the main narratives in crypto right now. That, you know, going into the summer of last year, it was really those Ethereum killers, the alternative layer ones that offer cheaper and more scalable solutions than Ethereum, you know, things like Avalanche, Solana, etc., things that are just more scalable and cheaper to use for retail investors. That was where a lot of the focus and attention is, and value was placed. But I think what we're starting to see people shift to is now shift to this idea of interoperability. That's not enough just for one chain on its own to be, for example, you know, scalable and cheap, but it also needs to be able to connect seamlessly to other blockchains. This idea of kind of building out this kind of multi-chain world that's all interoperable. And obviously Cosmos has probably been benefiting from that a lot because that's what it is. It's trying to be this hub where you can have this whole network of blockchains connected to each other. But another thing that's important, and that I think remains important, that kind of became apparent with that kind of alt L1 craze, but I think still continues, is the idea that also there's value being placed on networks that have a lot of DeFi adoption, that have a lot of use. So not just the promise or the capability, but the actual proof in the pudding, the fact, this idea that people are actually using the networks or those blockchains. And that's where, if we just look, Terra is the number 2 in total value locked in DeFi. Obviously not coming close to Ethereum, but nothing's going to come close to Ethereum for a while. Terra, number 2. The Binance Smart Chain is not connected to the Cosmos network, but the BNB network is, and so they're also sitting up there. So there's a lot of just money in the Binance chain that could pretty easily be switched over and then brought into the Cosmos ecosystem. That's notable there as well. See Chronos sitting down here at number 9, quite a bit of value locked on it. Osmosis, being the main DEX for the Cosmos ecosystem, sitting here at number 12. Then we have Kava down here at number 18. We just have a lot of value locked on in the Cosmos ecosystem, is basically what I'm saying here. I think that could be another thing that's been buoying Atom's value, is that not only is Atom proving its chops in terms of the interoperability space and really kind of starting to realize that fundamental potential, but it also just has a lot of adoption. There's a lot of adoption spread out across the Cosmos ecosystem, which has probably also brought it value. And then the Cosmos kind of developers, or the core team behind Cosmos, are trying to add to this. So recently, there's this announcement of this $150 million fund to invest in basically development in the Cosmos ecosystem. And so we're seeing potentially just even more growth going to be added in here, where if more chains get added into the network that can provide more use cases, that could bring in more funds. That could be another positive sign. And so really it's possible here that the Cosmos builders are trying to basically just capitalize on the interest and adoption of Cosmos and push that even further. And there's also been more institutional interest in Cosmos. So Grayscale has actually added Atom to some of its products, which is a vote of confidence, because the names that you see in Grayscale products tend to be kind of the ones that people have a lot of faith in, like Avalanche, Polkadot, and then obviously Bitcoin and Ethereum being the main ones. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be kind of excited about Cosmos. Now, one of the things that we have to be a little bit concerned about, or just careful about, is that the Atom token itself is a little bit limited in its use cases, at least right now. Its main uses are just kind of staking and governance. There's not really a whole lot else that's going on, because, when you're talking about other ecosystems, they have their own native tokens that are used for transaction fees on their networks. So Terra uses Luna for its transaction fees, for example. Kava uses Kava, all that kind of idea. They're not using Atom to pay for transaction fees. And that's one thing that sets it apart from some of these other things like AVAX or Solana, where, if you're getting DeFi adoption on those layer 1 chains, they're using that. People are having to use that token to just pay for transaction fees, which creates demand for the token. Atom doesn't have that built into it yet. Now, there are proposals out there for ways that people are trying to increase the use cases for Atom so that it has some more inherent value, kind of, because essentially the idea or the argument that some people brought up is that, Atom could go away and then the Atom ecosystem could still function with each other. There's not necessarily this inherent need for Atom. I think that'll likely be rectified, but that's something I'm currently watching for, is how will that be rectified, and is that really going to add value? Because I think really Atom's just been benefiting from kind of speculative kind of hype around its ecosystem. It's not necessarily that that Atom token itself has all this utility that's bringing in demand. So that's something that we're going to have to wait and see what happens. But certainly Atom's in a great spot, or Cosmos is in a great spot, that I think that if they can just add, which I personally believe will likely happen, that some changes will be made to the network or will be passed through governance that will create more use cases for Atom, which will then create more kind of natural demands for other outside of speculation. But certainly when you see what the Cosmos ecosystem has been able to achieve, it's pretty remarkable. And it is kind of, in my opinion, the standout in interoperability right now. Polkadot's kind of coming up from the rear, trying to build out its ecosystem, which I think could very well compete. But I think it's pretty remarkable what Cosmos has been able to do right now, and how it's been able to kind of realize some of its interoperability fundamental value. And it's one of those things where, personally, obviously there's going to be Cosmos maximalists who are going to hate anything they see as being a competitor like Polkadot. My personal opinion is that I think we're just in a multi-chain world for the foreseeable future. I don't think that both Cosmos doing well and DOT doing well is impossible. In fact, I think most likely both could thrive on, especially if interoperability is really highly valued. But it's something that we're going to have to watch and see what happens, and especially if more development happens on Cosmos, more use case comes in, I think it's really well positioned to capitalize even further on that interoperability narrative. So not financial advice. You should do your own research, your own due diligence, make your own decisions before deciding what investments you should take, or if you think that Atom is a good investment. But those are some things that I'm thinking about right now. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. We put out a lot of updates about our risk indicators and more over there.